Hi and welcome back. This is Police Stories Podcast and this is episode 29, a series of short stories about my 28-year career in the UK police force. So I hope you've suitably recovered from your Christmas and New Year. And we're going to talk today about basically the stories follow my career, from the sort of start to the finish. So we're pretty early days yet. And if you remember last week, we talked about I'd just done my AFO course, my Authorised Firearms Officers course. So I was in a pool that was able to deal with armed jobs, should that be required. But other than that, I was back to my normal sort of day-to-day stuff. Nothing changed for me really, except that I could expect, the occasional call, as we covered in last week's episode. Excuse me. So, but what happened was, every now and then, as an AFO that's based on, still on the sort of response teams, every few months you'd have to go and do some sort of refresher training. You don't just do an armed course and then get left alone. For a start, you have to do a classification shoot every 6 months, which means that you have to achieve a certain standard, and that tests various shooting abilities, from the standing, from the kneeling, from the prone where you're lying down, sort of fast draws where you have to fire a certain amount of rounds in a certain time, and it tests all your technical and sort of safety abilities as well, of clearing the weapon, cleaning the weapon, changing magazines, fixing jams. If you have a cartridge that jams and your weapon doesn't work, there's drills for that as well. On some occasions you'd switch to another weapon if it was available. If not, you'd have to quickly sort of clear your own stoppage, as they called it. So that would be tested every 6 months at least, sometimes sooner. And you had to achieve this standard to maintain your AFO's ticket, which makes sense because obviously, well, particularly if you had to pull the trigger in a real life scenario, the very first thing sort of complaints and, courts would be looking at is, were you an authorised firearms officer, so important. Anyway, so I'd gone up to the headquarters and I was doing part of this training, and we'd been on the range all morning, and kind of mid-morning-ish, we'd gone up for a break. And we were sat there watching the telly and the news, and this sort of live news flash came on, and it showed a place in America that I'd never sort of heard or been aware of, particularly the Twin Towers in New York. And of course, unfortunately, we know now it was the 9/11 attack, and we all sat there and watched in horror as the two jets, went crashing into the towers, and then subsequently what happened, we couldn't believe it. But we also knew that it would certainly change things for us, and in fairness, it actually changed policing in the UK forever because of various things. But certainly, I knew for me in those sort of short term, it was going to have some effect. So we finished our training that day, and we all went back to our respective stations where we continued doing our day-to-day jobs. But very quickly, within about 24 hours of 9/11, all of us that were AFOs in the county, and I think there was about 20 of us or so, basically had a phone call saying, you're getting posted to Gatwick Airport, and for me that was over an hour from where I lived, so it was quite a way away, but not unexpected. Now initially we were told that all AFOs in the county would be posted up to the airport, and it would be a relatively short-term thing. It would probably be 2 months, they reckoned, and that would be that. But in the police, nothing is set in stone, and ultimately, even now, it's a disciplined organisation, and you have to do what you're told. Sometimes you get posted to places you don't like, or you don't want to go to, or that are further away than you hoped of where you lived and all that. They're trying to be reasonable, but ultimately the job can still turn around to you, say, you are going, and there's nothing you can do about it, So that's what happened, literally within about a day or two, I started in Gatwick, So I was full-time armed. We were uniform armed patrol, sort of wandering around Gatwick, and there was, cars there. It was quite a big team, and you had quite a few capabilities. Gatwick has got a range there as well, so there's a lot of fire and sort of weapons training, as you'd expect, and they've got lots and lots of good tactics for dealing with people, ranging from, unruly passengers, which, let's face it, makes up a lot of the work, to, a full-on armed sort of terrorist incident with a firearms attack, on the airport. So I really enjoyed my time at Gatwick. To be honest with you, I didn't really see it as a bad thing. I always liked a bit of a change. I've been doing what I was doing then for probably 3 or 4 years. So I was happy for the change, and it was quite exciting, and the airport I thought was brilliant because it very rarely slept. Sometimes if you worked out in a rural location, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, there may not be a lot going on, and it's quite hard work to stay motivated in those early hours if there's literally no cars and nothing about. If you're rural, if you're in a town, then it never stops. But Gatwick was like a town, and exactly that. It never stopped, So although the flight stopped quite late, I think it was something like 11 o'clock or midnight at the time they stopped, and they didn't start again until 6 a.m. But obviously you constantly had people that had been delayed and moved on and what have you. And also you'd have a lot of people that were getting there very early. You'd have people turn up at 3 in the morning for a flight at 6 or 7 o'clock because they like to be there and know that they're, sort of haven't got to worry about, their train breaking down, or, they can't park the car, or there's an accident and they're late for their flight. So they get there very early. So there was pretty much always people there. Gatwick consists of 2 terminals. You've got the North Terminal and the South Terminal. The North is the smaller terminal, and there's a small sort of free train that takes about, a couple of minutes that runs between the 2. Now, bear that one in mind because I've got a couple of stories around that we'll go into in a minute. So a lot of the work is sort of armed patrolling. People are still shocked, or they were then, and I think they still are now, to be honest with you. They see policemen in the UK overtly armed, with certainly now what are quite sort of physically large guns. It definitely shocks people. And you'd have all sorts of silly questions, people saying they're not real, are they? But you don't carry any live rounds, do you? And you kind of look at them and be like, of course I do. What would be the point in carrying like plastic guns around with blanks in? It's just a bit of a ridiculous question. That one will come up all the time. People like to have their photo taken with you, and generally it was quite a good sort of natured place to work. In the police you're used to sort of everybody hating you, but it's one place you could work in the police, and actually, generally people were quite pleased to see you because they were going on holiday, So, of course, there was the odd exceptions. A lot of the work was dealing with unruly passengers. And as a rule, the armed officers didn't go there in the first instance, because the last thing you want to do, and we've discussed it before, is have a roll around while you're armed and carrying. That's a very bad thing to be fighting with someone while you've got a gun, because potentially that person could go for that gun. So we would definitely go there as backup, but not normally in the first instance. That may have changed now, obviously. So a lot of unruly passengers, a lot of offensive weapons to be dealt with at the search shot channels, because remember that all around the world, it's perfectly legal to carry knives and pepper sprays, and in a lot of countries, firearms. So quite often you get people that had been missed at their own airports boarding aircraft, and they were coming off, and generally they were quite often carrying, knives and pepper sprays and concealed weapons. So they were getting picked up in our search channels, and we would have to go down there and deal with them. And in the main, they were just confiscated, and that was that. I think they took a sensible approach that, we weren't looking to prosecute everyone who'd mistakenly brought something in their pocket that, was perfectly legal in their own country. So I think a sort of sensible approach was taken to that. But there was some exceptions. You had people bringing outrageous things in, and we would be called down to them quite often. In fact, one day we were called down to the search channels to see it was either pepper spray or CS or mace or whatever you want to call it, something like that. Illegal to carry in the UK, it still is, classed as an offensive weapon, and in some cases a firearm. But so we went down, and basically it looked like a lipstick, effectively. It had the outward appearance of a lipstick, and you took the lid off and you had to twist it in a certain way, and a little kind of spray, a nozzle if you like, popped out the top, and that was how you sprayed it. But the security guards who did this all the time were saying, well, it's definitely mace, something like that. And it came off this female passenger, and we just explained to her, look, you can't carry that in this country, we're going to seize it if you're happy with that, and we'll let you get on your way. And that was that. That was how it was dealt with then. So I think that was in the North Terminal from memory. So we'd gone over on the little free train that we were telling you about earlier, or I was telling you about earlier, and we'd seized it and we popped it in a bag, and we were going to take it back to the police station, and these things just got destroyed, and that was that. So we were sat on the train, or I think we were stood at the train, and we were at the front of the free train, and so it takes about 2 minutes to go across. And I had it, a classic man thing, can't stop fiddling with things. And I had it out the bag. We were right at the front, so no one could see us. And there was about another 20 or so, probably passengers behind us that couldn't see what we were doing, that we just had our backs to them. And I was showing it to my friend, and I said, because he hadn't seen it, I said, look, have you seen this? So you just take that off, and then I presume you push the button, and the stuff comes out. And I said, I doubt there's anything even in it, for sure. And I said, I presume it's quite hard to push, because obviously you wouldn't want to spray it by mistake. And while I was saying this to him, I was sort of fiddling about with it. I basically touched the top too hard and pushed the nozzle down, and it squirted a fine mist of pepper spray up into both our faces. It was fairly low level stuff, but it certainly got us coughing and choking. And then even worse, because those things have sort of got air con in, the air con pushes from front to back, I think, or certainly the fans do, because then people behind us started coughing and sneezing and spluttering, and kind of looking around at each other thinking, that's weird, oh, I've got some pepper up my nose or something, Of course, I tucked it away in the bag and was looking around, not saying anything. I wonder what that is. But we were like red eyes and streaming by now. Luckily, the train doesn't last very long at all. So as soon as it finished, we stepped off, and so did a few people coughing behind us. So it wasn't ideal, and now it makes you chuckle. But presumably I could have got in some trouble for peppering about 20 people on the train. But there we go, one of those experiences. Now, the other thing about this train was, there was a bit of a notorious sort of trick that we used to do with it. Now, the police is very big on wind-ups. Unfortunately, they have been lost over the years because, people take things perhaps a bit too far, and also you have people that perhaps easily offended. So, a lot of the sort of pranks that used to go on new cops have gone, unfortunately. But we did do them, and they were good fun. And one of our favourite ones was involve this train. So what would happen was, on the armed unit, you get someone turn up who was like super fit, really full of themselves. They'd done the AFO course, and they came on, and it was their first time, armed. And here they were at Gatwick, and they were thinking they were the bee's knees, and they tell you how fit they were. Oh, I run marathons, and I do this, and I can bench press, 200 kilo or whatever. And we're all kind of, all right, yeah, that's really good, sort of not too impressed at all. But after a while, it would be decided, right, I think we need to sort of run the circuit with this guy and teach him a lesson. So you had to sort of lay the seed. You had to start the wind up. So it would start typically that we'd be in a car or walking around, and you'd be saying, so you're a fit guy, aren't you? Saying you do a lot of running, and that, do you? Oh, right, yeah, okay, yeah. And they'd be, yeah, I'm really fit. I do this and I do that. Right, yeah. And you're fast. Can you sort of cover a lot of ground quickly? Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. And you go, oh, right, it's just that we've got this test here thing, it's not official, but it sort of tests, your abilities, and just gives you an idea of what your level of fitness is like. But it's really difficult. Only the fittest people could complete it. So we'll probably just leave it then, and you'd be quiet for a bit, and you'd literally, it's like, casting out a fishing hook. You'd just be waiting, give it 30 seconds, then we're going, no, tell us about this. What's this all about? What's this? Go, well, I mean, I can let you know if you want, but, say you've got to be really, really fit, very fast. I don't know if you're up to it, No, I am. I'm definitely up to it, So, okay, right. So I say, well, what happened is we go over to, so at night, the North Terminal would close. No flights would go from the North Terminal, and nobody was in there at all. And what would happen is, you'd say to them, okay, so we go over on the train, and the North Terminal is circular. So basically the free train doors would slide open automatically, and then basically it would wait for, I don't know, let's say 2 or 3 minutes before they'd automatically close, and it would go back off to the South Terminal. So what we'd say to them as a fitness test, what we would do is, you can't run with your gun because obviously it's quite big and heavy. So you'd have the whole team come over to watch you. So there'd be quite a few of us on the train, and we'd go over on the train, and then you'd say, you've got to be pretty fit to run round it and get back. Basically, you have to, you put your gun in a bag, and you put the bag, just down with your colleagues outside the train. And then when the doors open, you sprint off, and you have to sprint around the sort of circular North Terminal, and then you sprint back and get to the train. But you have to get back before the train doors close. That's the test, and I say it took about 3 minutes. Now, of course, they would be like, well, is it doable? You'd be like, well, of course, yeah, everyone else here has done it, but you have to be fit and fast to do it. But if you're not up for it, then just leave it, and of course, you're just laying out your bait, and no, I'm up for it. I can do it easy, Oh, cool, right, yeah, well, it's it's a bit of a coming of age thing, and it's just a way of proving your fitness to people so they know they can rely on you to really, play the part and really sort of buoy them up for it. Yeah, I'm up for it. So, okay, right, fine. So that's it. On a night turn, North Terminal shut down. There's no one in there at all. South Terminal, the main terminal, still open, but very few people in there. But what would happen is, so we go over first of all, the person would put their gun in a bag, and the bag would go to another armed cop who would sort of have it, in a bag at their feet, and they'd wait. And then Mr. Cocky would come over on the train, and the second those doors opened, he would explode off, and he'd be sprinting full power now around this terminal. What he didn't know was it was absolutely impossible. No human being, Usain Bolt or someone, could not make it in time. So the look of horror on his face as he came round the circuit, closing down on the train, to watch the doors sort of close, maybe 20, 30 yards ahead of him, and off it went. He was crestfallen that he hadn't made it. He wasn't fit enough. But even worse, just to enhance the wind-up, we would by now have taken the bag off, and somebody would have taken his gun and the bag and gone off somewhere else with it, and would be waiting around the corner. And they come running back, and as the doors close, you'd be like, "Oh, you didn't make it. I thought you were fit. Everyone else can do that. You didn't manage it. Oh, perhaps you're not as fit as you thought. You need to get in the gym, maybe." And then you say, "Oh, but the other thing is, we assumed you'd get back, so we put your gun in the bag back on the train, and we just assumed you'd make it, and we said, you did put it in the bag, didn't you?" Of course, we knew he had, and he'd be like, "Well, no, I gave it to him," so, and he'd point to whoever he'd given it to, and that person would be like, "Well, no, I thought you were going to make it back, so I put it back on the train." And everyone would be like, "Oh my God, this has never happened. Oh no, I don't know. How are we going to deal with this? Oh no, your gun is in that train by itself, going back across to the South Terminal." And you'd be like, "Oh no," and you'd make a massive deal. Of course, they'd be absolutely in bits now, absolutely terrified of what was going to happen. But what we always had was our inspector would be waiting in the South Terminal for the train with an empty gun bag, and he would come back on the train, so that now the new AFO, who's absolutely panicking that he's lost his gun, which clearly he hasn't, would, to his horror, here comes the free train and the doors are opening, the inspector is on it, holding up a gun bag going, "Who the hell is this? Whose bag is this? Someone has left their gun unattended on the train. I can't believe it," and he got off on a big rant. And of course, this poor cop standing there with his head bowed, thinking that he's about to be fired. And then eventually we'd let them in on the joke. But it was always a good wind-up. We enjoyed that one. And certainly, as I say, if you got Mr. or Mrs. Cocky that came in, telling you how fit and fast they were and how great they were, it just brought them down a peg or two. But it was good fun, good wind-up, no danger at any point. Unprofessional, possibly, that's sometimes what happens when there's, idle hands and all that. But so another good one was if you had somebody that was a car buff, if they loved their car big time, it was everything to them. They, invariably it'd be red or black and lowered and have jazzy wheels, and they'd be out there polishing it, and they'd come in and say, "Oh, I've just had it tuned, and I've had the stage 1 whatever chip, and now I put out 250 horse, and it's only weighs this," it would be reserved for the person who'd be going on and on and on about their car, you'd be like, "Oh, great." So what you do is you'd make sure, now this was the days before airwaves, so this was a local radio system that could only be heard kind of at Gatwick. It was very local. But the great wind-up was you'd make sure the person who loved their car was out in a van, and the van would be out deployed around Gatwick, patrolling the surrounding roads. And sometimes it would go, further afield. So you'd be looking at those perimeter roads and various bits and pieces, but you'd make sure the car lover was on that. And then what you do is you'd make sure the control room were in on this and there was nothing happening, and they would call up on the radio, and another car that was out, or a van that was patrolling in another part of the perimeter but away from you, would call up and ask for a PNC check, which is a check on a registration number on a car. Make out like they're behind it. So yeah, we're behind Red Ford Sierra, and this shows you how long ago it was. Red Ford Sierra, can we have a PNC check, please? So control room comes back, yeah, go ahead. They'd read out the registration number of this person's car, the person who loved their car more than anything. And of course, their ears would prick up straight away, and they sat next to you and they go, that's my car. What the hell? Why is my car? Why are they reading out my car? They're not behind my car. I parked my car. It's not out, you know. And of course they'd be going, well, they wouldn't be making it up, would they? They're obviously behind it. And they'd be going, yeah, okay, thanks very much. We're going to stop the car, you know, just to see what it's about. So there'd be silence on the radio. And by now, you know, this person's panicking again. Of course, immediately they'd then put up a false commentary and make up some horrendous story of a terrible car chase. So they'd be like, he's making off, he's failing to stop, we're in pursuit, you know, it's 70 mile an hour in a 30, you know, and he'd be like, it's 100 mile an hour, you know, sharp bend, brake lights are on, he's lost it, he's crashed, you know, and he's like, he's crashed into a tree, cars are right off, you know, car's on fire, it's bursting into flames, we've got runners, the people are out and running, you know, this poor person who's spent thousands of pounds on his car, who thinks it's, you know, the best thing ever, is just hearing the total destruction, including, always ended with a nice car fire, you know, just to finish off with. So yeah, that was a great wind up. And then eventually, of course, you'd head back to the Nick, and of course he would see his pride and joy still parked there in the car park. Yeah, another good wind up there. Another enjoyable one from our point of view. And bearing in mind, I'd been subject to these sorts of wind-ups as well, so it wasn't solely on me. And another one that we had, this is a third one, you might like this one. So we get a new probationer, and nearby where we worked, there was a theatre, and there was a massive fiberglass, like Red Indian, that had his arms in a sort of round, outstretched motion, and it was actually holding a bin. And it was a Red Indian with a great big, you know, sort of feathered, you know, headdress on and all that. So from a distance, it looked like a huge bloke, like, you know, kind of 7 feet tall. But he basically had his arms around what was a bin, you know, it was to encourage kids and that, you know, to throw stuff into the bin. So what would happen is you had to pick the right night. It had to be nights, and ideally it would be like misty or something like that. And the rest of the team would go up, and they'd be there, but in the shadows, you know, so you couldn't see them. And the radio, the control room, would put out a moody call to, we've got reports of drunk male, you know, at so-and-so theatre nearby. And it will come through to, like, me if I'm with the person who's having the wind-up. So you'd be like, yeah, no problems, we'll go and take a look at that. So again, you'd plant the seed on the way. You go, that's interesting. It's unusual because no one's normally there at night. You go, the only person I've ever known go there was, we had this guy once. He was a nightmare. He used to attack cops all the time. He was like, you know, Mad Jock, whatever his name was. You know, we'd make up some nickname for him or something. And he's absolutely huge, you know, but it wouldn't be him. He was in prison for attacking cops, so it won't be him. So, of course, you turn up at this job and it's misty and it's quite difficult to see. And as you're walking towards this location, we deliberately park away, so we had to walk up the drive to it. You'd start hearing noises. There'd be some moaning, you know. And so the probationer or the new person would stop and be like, what's that noise? And you sort of stop and you'd hear, you know, some sort of moaning or noise or whatever, and some sort of rattling or shaking or banging or whatever. And you'd be like, do you hear that? Yeah, I can hear it. I wonder what it is. You know, so get a bit closer. And what you'd have is somebody would be behind the big fiberglass Red Indian and would basically be making these noises and shaking it a bit. And you would make sure you stopped just short that you could see the outline in the mist of this big shape, but nothing else. And you'd suddenly grab hold of the probationer, grab him by the arm, and be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. He must have been released. It's Mad Jock, the policeman killer. You know, he must have been released and he's back here. I can't believe it. And they'd be like, we're going to have to be really careful here because he's a nightmare. You know, he's so violent. I'll have to call up some more units. You know, we're not going to approach him. So again, you'd really build it up. You know, now you've got this poor probationer terrified with their torch, shaking, holding their baton, sort of as you approach this. And there was more shaking of the fiberglass thing and more moaning noises. You know, you'd really build it up. And eventually be like, right, we're going to have to approach. So as you'd get closer, until the point where he was almost going to be able to see that it wasn't a person and it was a massive fiberglass, you know, Red Indian, the whole team would sort of spring out and surprise him or her, you know, much to their shock and horror. So that was always a good wind up as well. And you had poor probationers, you know, kind of literally shaking in their boots. Yeah, that one was good fun too. I mean, we did do some work as well, don't get me wrong. And I know people criticise the police for, they've got nothing better to do and all the rest of it. But I still say, and again, the police over the years have come in for a really hard time about, you know, the canteen culture and bullying and all the rest of it. It's a fine line between bullying and sort of camaraderie and also wind down. You know, in the police, you will see terrible, terrible things all the time. And, you need a release sometimes. And the wind-ups you have on team with people, for me, and for everyone I work with pretty much, always just help release that steam. And, you might make light of the most terrible situation. It was the way of getting through it. All cops would be basket cases without this sort of twisted humour that unfortunately you develop in the police. So there was always good wind-ups, and I personally think they're important for the team. They do help you to sort of bond. I'm sure other people perhaps will have different views on it, but this isn't their podcast, so there we go. So yeah, wind-ups were prolific, certainly. Another call that I had down when I was at Gatwick, we had a call to reports of a disturbance on a plane, very usual, drunk male, they're refusing. Now the carriers, i.e. EasyJet, Ryanair, whoever it was, BA, could refuse to take someone. If they were that drunk, at the waiting area, then they could say, we're not taking them, they're a risk, and we're not going to fly them today. And sometimes they could say, we're not going to fly them ever, which is obviously a big problem going forward. You'd also get the stupid ones that couldn't help themselves but make a joke about bombs or something prior to getting on the plane. Well, I can tell you, no one ever found that very funny, and that 100% will get you not flying out. The amount of times on Amsterdam flights and things like that, we'd be called, and basically, the steward or someone would tell us, look, we've heard him in the queue joking about bombs and we're not going to fly him. So you'd pull them to one side, they'd be drunk, and you say, you're not flying today. And of course they were absolutely appalled, and I was just joking, all the rest of it. Joke all you want, it's not funny, and they won't be flying you today, so that's your holiday ruined. So don't ever do that if you want to get kicked off the flight. This particular day, we got called down by the inspector to a male who was causing problems on I think it was a Spanish flight, like Benidorm or somewhere. And we go down. Now, this guy initially, at first glance, he was older. He was about 70 odd, I suppose, something like that. But he was clearly a really fit guy. Just the way he walked and moved, he just looked different to everyone else. He was very light on his feet, and he had a T-shirt on. And like I say, he was 70 odd, but with his arm sort of extended upwards, I could see that he had really, really big biceps still. He's very muscular. So facially, he looked like, a cute old man, but bodily wise, he looked like, quite frankly, some sort of warrior. And we walked up, and he's opening, he was being a pain, he was drunk, and he was basically being told he couldn't fly. And he was pacing back and forward, and he was clenching and unclenching his fists like he basically wanted to attack us, some pretty good warning signs. But he, very first thing he said to us when we walked up was, well, all these cops and no knife to stab you with, which I thought was an interesting line, And then, of course, we spoke to him, we got his details, and he came out with the classic, don't you know who I am? And we were like, no, mate, we don't. We hear it all the time. I'm kind of not interested. The bottom line is you can't fly, and you're going to have to leave the airport. And then he was saying, well, look me up, look me up online, you'll see. When you get back, I used to be someone. And now a lot of people at the time, bearing in mind we're talking, over 20 years ago, would be saying, I used to work for the Krays, or I was a Krays henchman or a bodyguard or whatever. Now the Krays were some notorious sort of 60s East End London gangsters, very nasty by all accounts, who did some pretty horrendous things. But virtually everyone who stopped in and around London for some years claimed to have, some sort of link to them. But this guy was different. And he came across different straight away, and I really was uncomfortable around him and was very cautious, and eventually we basically managed to convince him. He had money on him. We took him down to the taxi rank, and we had to basically get him away from the airport because he wasn't flying. But the whole time he was on edge, and we had to really sort of say, be very careful around this guy. He had money on him. We put him in a taxi and basically sent him on his way. But when we got back to the Nick, we did some searching. Now, sure enough, this was one of the few occasions he was exactly what he said. When I did some checking, it turns out he was like a very well-known bare-knuckle fighter, and had some big fights in his life. He's all over the internet. He'd been to prison lots, and had killed a person in prison, I think with his bare hands, really, really violent individual. Now, obviously, he was a lot older, but I was thinking, wow, if he was like that, you know, at this stage, he must have been an absolute beast, you know, when he was kind of, you know, 30, 40, 50, because he was still clearly quite a handful. And I'm convinced that had he really kicked off and we'd have had to arrest him, you know, I think we'd have all got hurt in the process. But there we go. Some lucky escapes sometimes, and that's that. So yeah, Gatwick, brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Ended up doing a year there. You know, was told 2 months. It ended up being a year, but I thoroughly enjoyed the year, and really, really good times. I say, a very variable place to work. Quite interesting, quite different from a policing point of view. But yeah, enjoyed it. So there we go. Episode 29. Hopefully interesting. No sort of specific stories as such. A few wind-ups in there. Like I say, the police used to thrive on them. Perhaps not quite so much now. And next week, we'll deal with some more stuff. Hope you're enjoying it still. We're all over the internet, as you know, Police Stories Podcast on Twitter or X and YouTube and TikTok and all that. Just advertising, you know, the next episode when it comes out. Generally about 8 o'clock, 8 a.m. on a Friday morning. So I'll speak to you again soon. Have a good week. Take it easy. Cheers. Bye.